Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903.
As a constitutional law attorney, former senior legal advisor, and personal counsel to President Donald J. Trump, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Jenna Ellis Show. I'm Jenna Ellis, and today is, of course, the inevitable autopsy of what happened last night in the midterms, which was not the red wave that a lot of us expected and, of course, hoped for. So what actually happened? Well, I'm going to have my good friend Ron Coleman, who's also an attorney. He is a partner with the Harmeet Dillon Law Group. They do a ton of great work on election integrity, First Amendment, so many other things, and he's been very, very involved. So he's going to join me in a few minutes with his breakdown, and we're going to have a great conversation that I know that you will appreciate. But I wanted to first, in just the first few minutes, give you kind of some overview of my own thoughts. I want to read actually my Twitter thread, because I think this is important to just, tell you kind of the overall analysis and kind of the big picture. So I put this out on Twitter earlier today. Last night was the Democrats using the same playbook from 2020, and voters bought it, a referendum on crazy. Democrats falsely ran their candidates as moderates and painted Republicans as quote unquote extreme. Democrats didn't debate, and the media predictably helped boost their preferred narrative. The GOP needed to push back strong on what's really crazy. No borders, no police, no guns, abortions whenever, mutilating children, woke teachers in schools, no definitions to reality, etc. The only candidates, and I highlighted that word on purpose, candidates, not just campaigns, not all of us who tried to help on social media, so many different surrogates and champions and all of that. The candidates matter. So the only candidates who did that effectively, pushing back on the crazy, were DeSantis and Lake. Instead, the GOP and their PACs spent millions going after their own candidates. There is a huge divide between the McCarthy Republicans, who are pro-woke agenda, and the Trump/DeSantis Republicans, who are anti-woke. The GOP still hasn't figured out its identity crisis. A house divided cannot stand. So that is the broad picture of what I think happened last night. And I want to distill that down just a little bit more, because I think a lot of people are rushing to judgment of blaming this on Trump, saying, blaming a variety of different things, when the reality is far more nuanced. And I also think that the Republican establishment really needs to take ownership of the fact that they on purpose tried to sabotage a lot of these candidates that the Democrats were falsely painting as too extreme. And so when you look at the GOP party, I think that there is still a huge identity crisis. And the fault lines here are not between Trump versus DeSantis. They're actually genuinely on the same side. They are two of the greatest champions for genuine America conservatism. What Ron DeSantis is doing in Florida is amazing. You saw him win in a landslide. What Donald Trump did for his first 4 years was incredible, shining the light on the swamp, pushing back against the fake news media. All of these things, both of them have in common. And in fact, DeSantis has taken a lot of pages from Trump's playbook. So to pit them against each other right now, I think is a mistake, because the GOP as a whole still has an identity crisis when you have national leadership like Ronna McDaniel and Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy, who I like to collectively call the McMorons. They are still in GOP leadership as the establishment with the people like Karl Rove, who was at the table on Fox News last night for the entire election analysis, who failed to talk about his own investments and his own PACs in trying to sabotage certain races as an establishment hack. And you have that wing still of the GOP that is in complete contrast to Trump and DeSantis. And so it's the easy narrative that people want you to buy into, to choose sides right now between Trump and DeSantis, when both of them are collectively doing exactly what the party momentum needs to shift to. And that is why MAGA Inc. has been so successful. That's why DeSantis has been so successful. That's why President Trump put out that, he had a historic number of wins last night, even though some of these races did not ultimately work out to the Republicans' favor. And some of them were, frankly, absolute disasters, like Dr. Oz. He was not the strongest candidate going into the primary, but he won the nomination and, of course, was going to be better than John Fetterman. And the fact that Fetterman, who is a stroke victim, can barely put together a coherent sentence, is now going to be a member of the United States Senate is disturbing, and it's shocking about how the Democrats simply control their narrative and they push back against conservatives and genuine America First candidates and always put us on the defensive. We are always having to answer the claims of anti-Semitism, of racism, of ableism in Fetterman's case, of sexism, against, women's right to quote unquote reproductive health. I think that actually played a much bigger role than people, even myself, were predicting. That people bought into that, and they bought into this framing of the election and of the wide swath of Republican candidates, from people like Oz all the way to people like Kari Lake and Blake Masters and Tudor Dixon and Doug Mastriano and Ron DeSantis, all of them collectively together who were running on the Republican ticket. The Democrats put every single one of them on the defensive so that their people could hide and could say, we're not going to debate. Fetterman did one debate for the sole purpose of standing on that stage and being able to say, I'm competent enough to do this. That's the only reason they let him come out of his basement. But everyone else, from Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania to Katie Hobbs down in Arizona, they did not want to debate because they did not want to have to justify or defend their terrible, terrible policies and track record. All they wanted to do was to be able to, from their basements, push out the false narrative against all of the Republicans and keep them on the defensive. And the only two candidates that actually pushed back and were successful at that were Ron DeSantis and Kari Lake. And you're seeing that in the election results. And it has bothered me throughout this entire campaign season to see how Republicans have been on the defensive instead of going on the offensive against the most extreme policies of the Democrats. And the candidates themselves will not go out and be on the offensive. Now, you have a lot of people, from the Matt Walshes to the Ned Ryans to the John Cardillos to to the Jack Posobics to the Jenna Ellises, right? Who we all, as the social media commentators and endorsers of candidates, in some instances, even advising some campaigns, like I've done in this last cycle. And we will champion those issues, and we are willing to go on the offensive. But the candidates themselves had a really difficult time doing that, other than Ron DeSantis and Kari Lake. And that is where you've seen most of the media attention, except for, of course, the mainstream media leftists will still try to paint them terrible, but nothing stuck to Ron DeSantis. Why? Because he didn't even give it the time of day. He didn't even answer it. He didn't give it air. He simply went on his own way to say, look at what the Democrats are doing. Everything that comes to Florida that's woke comes here to die. I mean, he has great messaging. He went out and he lived it for the last 4 years. And obviously, you all know that there are some of those administrative decisions that I disagree with outside of the margins of the Constitution. Fine, we need to have those conversations. But 99.9% of what Ron DeSantis is doing, which means he gets a grade A+ in my book. Everything that he has done is on the right trajectory. He has the right ideas, and he is a genuine conservative. The fact that there are some people that are trying to smear him as a rhino is absolutely ludicrous, and it's ridiculous. He's not even answering that. He is just doing what he was elected to do. Kari Lake would not take it when people were asking her, well, why are you foreclosing a woman's right to reproductive health? She would turn it back and say, I'm trying to save lives. It's your candidate, it's Katie Hobbs, who's trying to take all of these choices away from women for adoption and other options besides abortion. She'd flip the script and flip the narrative. That's what genuine conservatives have to do. But we all have to agree and coalesce around what the party identity truly is. And that is what is most concerning, is whether or not the GOP establishment, like the McMorons and like the Karl Roves, are going to now suggest that because there was, in their view, such a red trickle, not a red wave, that we can now lay the blame 100% at Donald Trump's feet so they can get rid of him. And then they can paint Ron DeSantis as a rhino and potentially try to oust him as well. And they can go back into being the elitist establishment swamp and saying everyone has to come home to us because we're the only ones that can win elections. We need to absolutely reject that. We need to have a much more nuanced approach, and we need to look and see what has been working and where the victories have been for both Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis and some of these other America First candidates in the messaging. And we need to do a much better job at coalescing behind the issues that matter and the people who are championing those issues versus the establishment hacks and the GOP. I would encourage you in this autopsy to draw the line where it genuinely is in the identity crisis of the GOP, which is against the establishment, and for truly America First conservatives like both Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, and I believe a genuinely wide swath of the true conservative GOP. That has to be our future. Otherwise, we are looking backward and we are allowing the establishment swamp to continue to rise that tide. And we will soon get so embattled and we will soon sink in the rising tide of that disgusting swamp again if we let them control that narrative.
Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903.
So joining me now with more thoughts, reaction, and analysis is one of my favorite people on Twitter and in real life, actually. We've actually had the pleasure of meeting, is Ron Coleman, who, of course, is a partner at the Dillon Law Firm doing great work on First Amendment issues and so much more, and also the host of the Coleman Nation podcast. So, Ron, first of all, some just generalized thoughts on the fact that we didn't have the red wave that everyone anticipated, but also we did have some kind of significant wins, too.
Yeah, it was, I don't know if, people tend to get really cynical on the internet, and everyone is part of some kind of plot, some kind of gaming. I don't know if there was really a concerted effort to raise expectations among Republicans unreasonably high. But as you know, the 48 hours before the election, people were talking about a 54-seat Republican Senate, maybe 56 seats, and my good friend Mike Cernovich was doing as he does, which is always go to the most extreme position within his spectrum of possible positions and, generationally transformative change. And instead what we got was pretty standard midterm adjustments in the context of the fact that we're not talking about, the 50s or the 60s or the 80s or the 90s. It's the 21st century. Things are different. The media landscape is different. The political landscape is different. The financial landscape is different. And it was a little disappointing, but as you and I will discuss, there's some very bright spots here for Republicans. And I tend to be a little bit on the white pill side, so users should beware. Your mileage may vary.
Yeah, and I think that the tendency to overreact on Twitter is just the nature of Twitter, and of course it's the nature of the media because that makes for better television, right? To say, oh, let's prop this up as this is going to be this, giant red wave, which I was hopeful for, and I actually thought we would decisively gain control of the Senate, definitely more decisively gain control of the House. And, but I really wasn't that surprised at how the governor's races are shaking out. We still don't know with Carrie Lake. I hope that she does ultimately prevail in that race. But what we saw, interestingly, Ron, was, and you and I spoke about this a little bit before the show, was that we saw some of the parallels actually to 2020. And I'm not talking about all of the election shenanigans. There were some of that. We need to honestly assess that and election integrity challenges. But really, to me, the biggest parallel was the fact that you had Democrats running their same playbook that actually worked in 2020 beyond just the presidential election. But they hid their candidates who are not moderates, who are the extreme, ridiculous, progressive, insane communist socialists, did not make them debate. They didn't have to defend their positions. They simply hid. And then all they did through utilizing the mainstream media and the fourth estate, they painted every single America First candidate as totally crazy and quote unquote too extreme. That was their messaging. And when all of these Republicans were on the defensive the entire time, it didn't work well for them because the Democrat model and that messaging actually worked. And I was hopeful, and correct me if you think I'm off base here, but as much as we have kind of renewed a landscape of alternative media, legacy media really, and advertising on traditional platforms really is still driving that narrative to the kind of moderate swath that aren't just hardcore, no matter what, left, right voters.
Well, I don't know the metrics. I don't know what channels were or were not working. And I'm not even sure I'm able to sign on to this idea that they were hiding anything. I think at this point, the positions of partisanship in this country are so solid and so firm that, and the people who voted for John Fetterman, I mean, two years ago, you could have, I had a professor who I'm very close with, who has an endowed chair at Princeton, and he it's obviously he's not Robbie George. You're going to be clear from this conversation, because I said, you realize that Biden, even if you're all in favor of Joe Biden, the guy has lost it. I mean, he says, no, he had a childhood speech impediment. This guy is a renowned author and intellectual, and he's sitting there telling me that he had a speech impediment. Okay, now that's people lying to themselves. Well, nobody is lying to themselves about John Fetterman. No one. Everyone knows he's a severely disabled, brain damaged person, and they actually trotted out this idea of ableism, okay? So I don't think there's any hiding going on. I think we've reached the point where partisanship is so strong that people don't care. They are voting against. And the fact that he was going up against a not very strong Republican candidate didn't help. But I don't know if Ronald Reagan were running. Okay, I don't know if name your favorite Republican. Let's keep Donald Trump out of it. We know he's too controversial. We'll talk about him later, of course. But I don't know if anything would have helped. You have these just rock solid partisan votes, and I think that states like Pennsylvania are the symbol of a real failure of democracy. I don't think I can't pin this one on cheating, and I can't pin this one on the media. I think this is who we are in 2022.
And I agree with that last assessment. I mean, there are still concerns, obviously, like there have been for years and well before 2020 about election integrity. But, there isn't this kind of concern like we had in 2020. We can't just say, oh, my gosh, everything's stolen. I mean, that's ridiculous for this election. But as we're looking at some of the other races, I think you're absolutely on point with John Fetterman and the Oz race. And it was simply, Oz was not a well-liked candidate at all. And they did trot out this whole thing about ableism. And, this is the Democrats' messaging, though, because everything is always, you are a racist. You're not for protecting women. You're not for this. You're not for that. And so Republicans are always on the defensive all the time. And when you're playing defense, you're losing. And that's where Donald Trump actually historically has been very good at that. But who we saw really win last night was DeSantis, who had not only the best messaging, but the best actual action against wokeness. And he just never took nothing that they tried to push against him and smear him with stuck, because he didn't let them change the narrative. It was all about what he was actually doing for the people of the state of Florida. And we didn't see that from any other candidate. But what I mean about
Carrie Lake. Yes. He was following, and they were both following the Donald Trump formula, which no one else until Donald Trump as a national Republican candidate, closest thing I can think of actually is Chris Christie, actually putting it back into reporters' faces and saying, whoa, I'm not going to answer that loaded question. Up yours, up your nose with a rubber hose, putting it right to them. And, Christy Lake is another unbelievable story that should not be developing at this time on the next day. But those two learned it. Yes.
I did include her in my kind of tweet assessment, the thread. If anyone listening wants to go and look at that, to say, the only candidates that executed, the candidates themselves who executed that being on the offensive model was DeSantis and Lake. And I didn't include her initially, just for clarification, because she's not currently in office. So, DeSantis actually had, right. So in that sense, he was
pushing back on policy. In other words, on actual,
right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right, on policy. But in terms of engaging the media and not letting anything stick to her, yes, the two, I fully agree with you. But then just going back real quick on the last part of that comment, but what I didn't see from the Democrats in the same way as Fetterman, and it was interesting that they actually allowed him to debate, were people like Katie Hobbs, or people like Josh Shapiro. So let's talk about that race in Pennsylvania, where you have the false smear of Doug Mastriano as this extremist, anti-Semitic, Christian nationalist, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And no one was talking about Josh Shapiro's failed policies, his record on crime. I was, but how the campaign refused to comment. He refused to do opposition media. I think that was a huge mistake. And Josh Shapiro didn't have to debate. And so they could hide these types of actually extremist candidates and position them in media as moderates, which is totally false, but people bought it. And we saw that with Doug's race. We're seeing that with Blake Masters. We're seeing that, in a lot of these races that could have been won or even been a lot closer. I think that type of model of hiding the candidate, projecting that they're moderates, and just absolutely falsely smearing the conservative Republicans was their playbook in 2020 with Joe Biden, and they just amplified it to everyone else this time.
Well, there's something else that went on with Doug Mastriano, who I only found out yesterday I went to high school with.
Really?
And I say went to high school with. He graduated Hightstown High School in '82, and I graduated in '81. I dug up both of our high school yearbook pictures. We both look very suitably 70s, but we did not hang out. But
the thing the Philly Inquirer did not get those. That would have been another smear. Look at what they wore in the 70s.
Yeah, right. But then again, I think a lot of us are vulnerable to that. Of course, you weren't even born yet. But for us, there was another trick, and by the way, this to me falls well into the category of all's fair in love and war, and in electoral politics. Doug was probably not the strongest possible Republican candidate for a governorship of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Democrat money flowed to him so that a weaker candidate would get the Republican nomination. But you know what, Jenna? After what we said about John Fetterman, I don't know if anything would have made a difference. Again, the people of Pennsylvania voted for a stroke victim with very, very obvious continued impairment. Mm-hmm. And it is we're past, and it's interesting because this morning I saw Ben Shapiro, who takes, you have to always appreciate because he's one of the smartest guys in the world. Candidate quality counts. Okay, that explains maybe Dr. Oz, but it doesn't explain John Fetterman. Obviously, sometimes it doesn't count at all.
Yeah,
that's the problem. And I think, frankly, that Dr. Oz was that much better, and and Fetterman was that much worse compared to Shapiro. Look, Shapiro is a guy who at least he presents very nicely. It looks like what a governor should look like if you put him on a box to stand on. That's a respectable looking governor. So he's going to get 100% of Democratic. I mean, people are just simply not really choosing candidates anymore. It is a war of attrition between party blocks in the closely matched states, which is still the vast majority of them. Mm-hmm. And there we have it.
Yeah. And, and I think that the analysis to say that we are so siloed as a country into these camps and the tribalism and the extremes, I don't really think that there are as many independent voters as we would like to think that there are of at least people who actually get out and vote. So if we're talking about actual voters.
And Republicans are not, and that's why the Republicans who will not do what you and I were talking about a couple minutes ago, which is push back and be assertive in their views and in the way that they're, pushing back in the way they're treated by the corporate media. They're afraid of offending that, in my view, as well as yours. I've been saying this for a while now. The undecided voter, I think, is largely a fallacy. It's about turnout and about all kinds of Moneyball type stuff. But who could possibly have gone into the voting booth yesterday and said, I still can't decide between the stroke victim and the guy who doesn't seem to have anything to do with the state of Pennsylvania. Like either one of those things bothers you, and the other, those weren't last minute decisions. People know that. But also, it also reminds me of another point, which is, again, I am really reluctant. You and I were feverishly communicating this time 2 years ago. I was trying to get you information. We were among, the official, semi-official, everybody who was running it. The legal piece was run very well this year because of my partner, Harmeet Dillon. And even though she's all over Arizona and she's been there for the last week plus, they still screwed up. Not because that's lawyers can't handle everything, can't take care of everything. But
thank you.
I'm reluctant again to invoke the cheating stuff. But I will say this, and I think people are on the money on this. This change from election day to election month, and this mail-in voting, this mail-in balloting, Republicans cannot win in these states, Wisconsin, Arizona, Pennsylvania. They will not ever win again if there isn't reform of mail-in balloting. And that was largely approved by Republicans during the great COVID scam of 2019, 2020.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is where the larger conversation about election integrity needs to be had, not in the context of an autopsy of one particular election, and not in the context of just reforming after the fact or the remedy. And, you and I both know as lawyers, it's far, far better to prevent an accident than try to go and have some kind of remedy after the fact, because you're never going to be made whole. The justice system just doesn't have the tools as much as we can try. And there are metrics and all of those things to get justice. Yes, that's helpful. But having election integrity before the election is so much better than trying to remedy any of these failures after the fact. And I totally agree with you that there was, and I was saying this even before the outcome last night, that there's been a lot of steps that were taken between 2020 and now this election that have that really helped a lot. And we did see some very stark examples of things that still need to be remedied. And we need to have those conversations, not be intimidated by the left to say, oh, you're election deniers. That was another big trope that they had, that they trotted out to say, look at how many, MSNBC and AP and some of these others were focusing and actually had countdown tickers to say, look at all the election deniers that are winning and losing. It's like, that's not a party. That's not a thing at all.
And using that and inserting the election denier, lie, it's really just a propaganda lie, into headlines as if that were either balanced, which is not, because we know that Democrats have questioned and challenged elections for as long as you and I can remember, but also as if it were improper to do so. We have procedures for doing that. We're allowed to invoke them. Not every one of them works. Not every one of them gets a full hearing, et cetera, et cetera. But
that's the nature of the process as well. I mean, people saying, oh, you're, these claims aren't legitimate somehow because you didn't get a full hearing on the merit, or, look, you're perpetuating the big lie, for example, that's their other trope, is to totally on purpose and intentionally pervert the whole idea of process and what it means to be a lawyer. Because if we were failed lawyers, you and I, based on every case that for a client that we took that didn't have the outcome that we championed, no lawyer would ever be successful at anything, because you win some and you lose some. And that's the nature of the adversarial process. It's designed that way on purpose.
If you ever hear someone say, I never lost a trial, that means that this is someone who settles.
Yes. Yeah, and who is afraid to step into the ring and step into the arena and actually represent people who it's kind of a toss-up. I mean, you and I both have been in contexts in jury trials that it's a toss-up, really. I mean, and it depends on the composition of the jury. I mean, so many factors that we could all talk about, we have talked about in the context of the law and the process. But what people are so quick to judge in the context of election integrity is just the outcome of the election itself, rather than the entire mechanics and the process behind it. And I think that fundamentally needs to shift in our conversation about election integrity. But setting that whole piece kind of aside as one aspect of the autopsy, let's talk about also the I think in some ways the unfairness of saying, well, this was just a terrible night for Republicans as a whole. I don't think that's true. I think there are a lot of things, of course, we can criticize. I criticize the establishment for going after their own. I mean, a lot of things about specific campaigns that could have been done better. But as you said, I mean, whether that would have actually affected the outcome is anybody's guess. But let's talk about some of the actual wins and some of the things that were really remarkable that actually happened last night, like in New York, for example, Lee Zeldin.
Lee Zeldin didn't win, but Lee Zeldin came closer to winning than any Republican gubernatorial candidate in a hell of a long time. Basically, since Pataki destroyed the Republican Party of New York State, and our not more important, but two very, very significant things happened in New York, along with Lee's failure to win the governorship. One was a tremendous number of congressional seats were flipped red in New York. No one's talking about that. It doesn't fit the red trickle narrative, but that's gigantic. And number two is there was a decoupling of the very significant and influential Orthodox Jewish community and voting bloc in New York from essentially from the Democratic Party. Even though it was not enough to get Lee Zeldin over the finish line, in a way, it's almost better that it worked out this way, because what my community learned, and believe me, the communications were coming on, the private social media and the WhatsApp groups and the news and the community papers and every form of communication, people were going really, really strong for Zeldin with very, very few exceptions. There's a realization now that the old idea that the Democrats are a party that's always going to work with Jews, always going to support Jews as part of a big tent of, this coalition of minorities, that's over as far as the what we might call the strictly Orthodox community in New York City. The New York City and state have attacked our educational institutions. They've attacked our ethics. They targeted Orthodox Jews for special enforcement and blame in connection with COVID, baselessly, in fact. And what the community has learned is that you can no longer trade support for support, because it's a one-way street. These people no longer feel that they need our community. Not only that, their cultural, and this is really critical, and this is something that your many listeners will appreciate, because so many of them are people of faith as well. Their cultural agenda, their moral agenda is absolutely contrary to Judeo-Christian values. And there's no longer room for Orthodox Jewish families in that coalition. That's over. It's going to be a very different experience politically in New York in the next few years. And Lee Zeldin's stature, he's a young guy, is only going to go up. There's a lot of exciting and important stuff that's going to happen, but a line was drawn, and where it's going to take us, I don't know, but I think it has national implications because of the very high contrast that you have on this issue in New York.
Yeah, that's very well said. And I think your analysis of saying that the coalition lines are being redrawn is important, not just to these historically and traditionally very blue states, but also some of the red states as well. I mean, when you look at the significant win by a wide margin of Ron DeSantis, which wasn't surprising, really, because he's so popular, but at the same time, at one point,
and Charlie Crist. I mean,
it's just ridiculous. But at one point, there were pollsters that were saying, "Oh, look, he's only 4 points ahead. This is going to be a razor thin margin, and this is going to be like it was in 2018." Well, they forget that the lines in Florida have been completely redrawn since 2018. What was a very slim margin, and people didn't even really know the name Ron DeSantis in 2018 and Andrew Gillum. That was a razor thin margin. But now so many people have moved to Florida because of Florida's policies and because Ron DeSantis has been pushing back against the whole woke ideology. And that's what conservatives want. But then you have this coalition among the old establishment GOP that really doesn't want that. I mean, these are the people like the Ronna McDaniels, like the Kevin McCarthys, that are very squidgy, and they want to say, well, we're such a big tent that we're okay with the MAGA drag queens. We're okay with Pride Month. We're okay with, all of this other stuff that traditional faith-based conservatives are not going to be okay with. And so within the lines of just the GOP coalitions and the new line drawing between whether we want to term it MAGA Inc. versus establishment, or whether it's now the party of DeSantis versus the establishment, or however we want to draw those lines, I think the GOP still, from 2020 and now into 2022 and beyond, still has an identity crisis.
Oh, for sure. And, look, obviously, the gorilla in the room that you and I are not discussing for all kinds of good reasons right now is Trump and DeSantis. That's a gigantic fault line. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. And in fact, if it's handled correctly, it could be gold. It could be gold. But the people involved don't listen to me, and I'm not so sure they listen to you either. But there's an incredible opportunity there. Latinos, Hispanics, completely different complexion. Now, someone said yesterday on the internet that, well, what you can't deduce anything from Florida, because Florida, what happened in Florida is all these conservatives moved down to Florida, and there was a time when Florida was considered a toss-up state. Now it's clearly a red state, and it's true. In 2020, when Florida was, election night, when Florida went for Trump the way it did, we said, well, that's it. I mean, they're not going to get better for the Democrats as we move further west, is it? Oh, yeah, sure as hell did. It sure as hell did. We now understand that Florida is something different, but I'm not sure that there's a really good, people really have their hands on why it's different. And yes, Florida's not a regular southern state. It's not just a bunch of New York Jews who moved down to South Florida. It's not just a bunch of Cubans. Is there, I think that the lie has already been put to this idea that, well, Florida's full of older Cuban immigrants who are anti-communist, and that's why they're right-wingers. Where were they during the Gillum election? Okay. No, Florida is full of Dominicans. Florida is full of traditional Latino Christians. By the way, not all of whom are Catholics, many of whom are evangelicals.
Right.
And they don't like what they see. They don't like what they see. And I live in Passaic County, New Jersey. We have a lot of Muslims in Passaic County, New Jersey. They don't like what they see either. So there's a lot of moving parts here. It is a mistake to be facile about, what trends were demonstrated last night.
Right. And I think that's also very important to the autopsy, is to not make these general broad comments that there was just one, cause of death, if you will, that it was just, and again, the other thing that we've carefully avoided until now is this whole notion that everything can be placed at the feet of Donald Trump, and he's to blame for everything, which is, of course, what those who would like to oust him as the party leader want to project. And then people who are the hardcore, what people would call Trump cultists, right, would say, well, they just never admit when he's wrong. And so, but I think both of those assertions are flawed for the same reason, is that it's overgeneralized and it fails the nuance. And what a lot of the 3-minute or 30-second TV clips don't want to say is that it is far more complicated than that. And we are a far more complicated country right now, because there are people, like you talked about at the very beginning of this interview, that voted for a stroke victim in Pennsylvania, knowing that he is not competent to be in the Senate, but they voted for him anyway. And that says something vastly different than the people in Florida who are going to push back, and they love their champion there who is pushing back against the woke ideology. And where those two vastly different outcomes speak for the rest of the population of the country, we didn't get a good pulse on last night because it's not a presidential year. And so how people are going to interpret that data is, of course, going to be biased depending on their interpretation of whether they want Trump or DeSantis to run, whether they want the GOP to be totally dead, whether they want to put up Gavin Newsom, or whether they want to pretend that Joe Biden will run again and get another 4 years. I mean, so a lot of this, and what I would caution people listening to this program to consider, is that it's not, a lot of the analysis of this is so cabined within a personal bias of what people want you to believe happened, that it is very selective information flow. I mean, it's the same thing that lawyers do in court all the time. Don't look at that fact, look at this one. And the outcome, totally vote for and find for my candidate, my client, because of this one thing. And it's often far more complicated.
Well, what I heard for the first time in the last week was, when Donald Trump took a swipe at Ron DeSantis to I think very broad surprise last week. All of a sudden, I started hearing this narrative. Well, yeah, because you know what's going on. DeSantis is meeting with McCarthy, and with who else was it?
McCarthy and it wasn't McConnell, but
wasn't Ryan. That would be impossible.
That would be ridiculous. But it was, the McCarthy.
But they're plotting how to edge and to make. Listen, I don't know who I don't have any information whether it's true or not. I think it would be preposterous for the governor of Florida if he gets a call from national leaders of the party to have a chat with him, not to pick up the phone. I don't know, but people really want to take sides. And one of the things I keep seeing is, from really strong Trump friends of mine, and you and I, we've bled for Trump. If anyone watching this doesn't painfully aware of that, okay, yes. Jenna and Ron have bled for Donald Trump, and full disclosure, he remains a client of my firm through Harmony, and she's working for the Trump campaign very assiduously. Just got that nice dismissal, in fact, in that ridiculous lawsuit with that traitor from Ukraine. But DeSantis is a rhino. DeSantis is a rhino?
I mean, come on.
Come on. So, it's almost like, what can we do to shoot ourselves in the foot? Now, I'm not one of these guys that's saying, let's play patty cake all the time. Democrats are better at maintaining unity as a party. Although the extreme left, they will attack each other. Because once you got the Bernie people and the Antifa people, and I do think it got a little bit more complicated. But Republicans tend to be people of ideas more than they are of messaging. That's just true. A lot of dust has not settled.
Right. And, and I think it's also difficult because, the Democrats, like you said, they do coalesce. And when one person is errant, like what we saw in the Democrat primary in 2020, when Tulsi Gabbard attacked Kamala Harris, she was gone. I mean, they just literally, and now she's not even part of the party anymore because she did not play the game. She didn't go along with the narrative. It is a true, they have what the Bolsheviks call party discipline. And not only Bolsheviks, of course, they have it in parliamentary politics. Well, maybe not in Israeli parliamentary politics, but in traditional, the British Parliament. If the leader of the Tories says this is how we're voting, that's what we do. The Democrats, as a coalition party, tend to. I've always been astonished at how Republicans held the line on the vast majority of judicial appointments during the Trump administration. Even Mittens,
I never that was astonished at that. But, again, when there were party lines on the impeachment, every single Democrat knew what his job was. Not every Republican.
Yeah, and we still see that in this identity crisis within the GOP, that frankly the Democrats don't have an identity crisis. They know who they are, they know what they want to accomplish, and they also know what they don't want to have to defend, and so they just simply won't talk about it, or they will have the press secretary just say no, there's and deny reality. And they're very coalesced in that sense, where the GOP still has an identity crisis from the old establishment that Trump shined the light on and, was not fully successful in draining the swamp. And we all know that. But now they're trying to, I think, cast the divide between Trump and DeSantis instead of where it properly belongs, which is with the old establishment swamp and the new anti-woke America First agenda that is not defined solely by Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis. And like you said, there is a huge overlap of where the two of them, if they were very smart at this, could together run away with the party in a very good trajectory and leave that old establishment uniparty sort of model that is basically, I call them DNC light because they are, leave that behind. And so I think where a lot of the responders to the election last night, drawing the distinction and casting the blame on Trump versus propping up DeSantis versus, well, don't abandon Trump and you hateful people, whatever. This shouldn't be right now. It should not be a battle between Trump and DeSantis. It should be a battle for the soul of the Republican Party.
Agreed.
Yeah. And I hope that is the one thing that people take away from the two people who, as you said, have bled for Trump. And, I love Donald Trump and I love Ron DeSantis. I don't agree with everything that either of them have done in their respective administrations. And that's fair because I'm a voter too, right? So, and those types of criticisms are fair. But I think that we need to be very careful in this autopsy to not, as you said, shoot ourselves in the foot. So how can we as conservatives genuinely better message that when we have all of this just, kind of shotgun blast on social media, in the regular media and all of that? Where do we go?
One thing that I made last night as I was falling asleep, I finally got sick of what I thought were the rather facile takes on what had happened, what had not happened. I wrote a rather long thread. And one of the things I observed was, by the way, did you realize we were just allowed on Twitter to debate whatever we wanted? Do you realize? Yeah. Okay, all the bans have not been rolled back. There's a lot of work to be done, and I have a whole separate video on that. But, ladies and gentlemen, this is a significant political development. So let's not, us conservatives, spoil it by going after each other's throats. Again, Trump is cancer. DeSantis is a rhino. Everyone that Trump, the hot take, the appetite for hot take seems to be insatiable. I don't know. There's one hot take I'll give you though that every reasonable conservative should agree with. And I know they have their little snarky responses to it, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. Libertarians must be destroyed, rooted out, rounded up. They ruin everything. Mm-hmm. They cost us another Senate seat last night, and they might cost us. And this, I'm not going to vote. I'm going to say, there's someone who DMs me all the time about how I'm not coming out. If these Republicans are going to keep being rhinos, then I'm going to. Okay, just realize you're voting for Democrats and you do that. That's a vote for Democrats. And if you don't understand it as an adult, how a two-party system works, okay, then you're perfectly positioned to be a libertarian. You'll be ruled by Democrats. Well, we want to force Republicans to come out and be the real conservatives we need them to be, so they won't be this uniparty. That is a great idea, but it's never how two-party system has ever worked.
And there are a lot of great ideas and theories that in reality don't work. We've seen that in the context of, trusting the science and all of these other things in so many different examples. But I completely agree with you. And I've said for a long time that the idea of libertarianism and this whole idea that we aren't part of a collective civil society, not in the way that the Democrats want to frame it. This isn't corporate guilt and just a cog in a machine in socialism, but in the sense that civil society actually matters and governing is a collective and it's a civic responsibility. Man is not an island unto himself, like the libertarians would like to suggest. And so there are so many things that we could parse about the ideals and the philosophies of libertarianism that actually has more in common with the Democrats, I think, than with true conservative policy. But the practical reality, as you just mentioned, is that so many libertarians end up for their own, frankly, and I don't say this lightly, their own arrogance, won't vote for the lesser of two evils, simply because they are upset that their perfect unicorn is not on the ballot, and they have to express that in the only way on the ballot that they know how, and that does cost elections like the Senate. And so, and I think with Warnock and Walker that are probably headed to a runoff, if the Libertarians had come out and voted for Herschel Walker, he would have prevailed in that race, and we wouldn't even have a runoff.
And I understand if you're a libertarian. Look, libertarians do tend to be thoughtful people. They're people who are really interested in ideas, and they're dope heads also. I mean, they could be one or the other. They could be both. But so the idea to them that I'm going to vote for a guy who I only ever heard of as a football player, and then doesn't necessarily present as this great intellectual, are fine. But meanwhile, the Democrats are putting a literal stroke victim into the governor's mansion. It is a war. And you're losing. Mm-hmm. During World War II, we allied with the guy who was tied for first as the most evil dictator of the 20th century because it was one side or the other. Now, I know that there are some conservatives who got in trouble for suggesting that that was the wrong move. I don't think that they're correct when they say that. But the point is, you need to know they're coming for you. And libertarians will not be spared because of their luckily I'm guessing and hoping not too many libertarians watch this program, but if they do, they know where to find us. They will not be spared the bullet in the back of the head because of their intellectual integrity when the roundup comes. And there's some really terribly troubling things going on in this world, and Democrats who are given the power will take that power and run with it as far as we'll let them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so well said. And again, it's so interesting to see some of these coalitions, and the libertarians for a long time have wanted to have that sort of fealty to what they consider superior intellectualism than they do the practical mechanics of politics. And and in full disclosure, I mean, I was very open to say that I would not support the Republican nominee in my home state of Colorado, where I voted for Senate, solely because he championed pro-choice. And, and he didn't really have, it wasn't a razor thin margin. It was actually in all reality, an easier position for me to take than it would have been if it was set to be a close race like Warnock and Herschel Walker. And not to say that I would have reevaluated the moral position at all, but in terms of exercising my vote, it was a much easier call. And it was also one of those things that, in that context, if the Republican Party is going to put up candidates that are so fundamentally not Republican, not conservative, then I'm not going to vote for them. But it's not because of moral superiority in an intellectual sense. It's from a practical mechanics standpoint that I don't want somebody going as a Republican to the Senate to then persuade other senators who are Republican to go ahead and codify Roe versus Wade. And so there are some of those calculations that do need to be assessed. And I was very happy to see Joe O'Dea lose. He deserved to lose by a wide margin. But then, but by and large, when we're talking about this two-party system, there are very, 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 very few instances where those types of races are the outliers. And by and large, both you and I have championed for a long time that we're in a closed universe situation where you have to select the best of the candidates that emerge in the general. And one of the things that I found so frustrating with Doug Mastriano's race, for example, was that you had a lot of these staunch Republicans that were frustrated that he was the nominee, even though he won by a landslide in the primary. They said to their detriment, well, he can't win in a general. And so it was a self-fulfilling prophecy because they never even gave him the opportunity. Now, we've talked about a lot of other issues in that particular race, but so many people who are bothered by the candidate for no other reason than their preferred candidate didn't win, that's not how elections work. And people have to get past that. And they have to say, so for example, there were a few candidates in the primaries that I either endorsed or ended up, helping on social media. For example, JD Vance's race. I endorsed Josh Mandel in the primaries. And I actually texted JD last night and said, I'm not really convinced looking at, Ohio and Mike DeWine and, won, and that was great. And I think that Ohio was a great red state. But at the same time, I'm not so sure, given the landscape of everything that happened last night, because of how they would have painted Josh Mandel in the general as another election denier, an extremist, in ways that they couldn't attack JD Vance for. I think he actually ended up being the better candidate in the general election. And as soon as Mandel lost, bummer, but I was 100% behind JD Vance. That's how primaries work. And so I texted him last night. I said, I'm actually grateful that you were the candidate in the general. I'm not sure that Mandel would have won that race. Maybe he would have. I don't know. But the fact that we're seeing those types of interesting scenarios, we have to always look at the truth and the reality of things and not just think that our own opinions, win or lose, right or wrong, are ultimately 100% gospel. And I am not going to ever be so arrogant as to say that, oh, well, I always endorse the best candidate. I'm going to pick the best of who I think at the time. And I'm always going to support the candidates that genuinely, I believe, have the best policies, the best opportunities to win. But that doesn't mean that you get it right 100% of the time.
Agreed. It used to be a little bit simpler. It's not so simple anymore. Things have gotten complicated. Things have gotten, look, to some extent, it wasn't as simple as it looked then either. We know more. There's more, in a way, there's probably more manipulation, but there's also in other ways more transparency than before. And we're all a lot more cynical. But we're definitely, we're further apart. People have difficulty, and, even I'm not old enough to remember Roosevelt, but there were a lot of good Americans who really, really couldn't stand Roosevelt, really thought he was a communist. And then you had this sort of era of good feelings, but then there were people who, had no respect for Eisenhower, the guy who won World War II as much as any other American. They considered him to be a clown. Now, there is a tradition in American culture to treat all Republican presidents as John Fetterman. Eisenhower was supposed to be an amiable duffer, and Nixon had the audacity to rise from the middle class and assume to rule. And we all know how stupid George W. Bush was, and George H.W. Bush was an effete preppy. We know how this always cuts. But things have been, what really, really concerns me is that where we are now is that these things don't even matter anymore. An observation a lot of people have made is how Saturday Night Live, no one really cares about these people anymore, but the culture, the tastemakers of TV, and I don't watch TV, but this is what I'm perceiving, and this is what I'm hearing people say. Saturday Night Live and the late night hosts, they don't even attempt to make fun of Democratic politicians anymore. And if they do, it's newsworthy. It's a given that you're going to make fun of Republicans. I mean, when I was growing up Saturday Night Live, they made fun of Jimmy Carter just as much as they made fun of Gerald Ford. That's how it worked. You actually attack the people in power. Now they're part of this entire system. They're part of, and we turned a very troubling corner, though, because we just went through 2 years where America basically said, we're okay with having a senile man as president of the United States, a man who we know. I'm astonished when I see friends of ours tweeting something. Why does Biden think he can do this? Biden doesn't think anything. They tell him, stand on the X, okay, and we'll tell you when to sit down.
And he can't even do that well sometimes. Right? He falls off the stage.
That's where he is. That's right. So after 2 years of saying we're going to let a shadow cabinet of puppeteers. And this is like not the puppeteers, the people who are really, actually people who are, he's not making the decisions. He's not making the decisions. There are no press conferences involving him himself. He doesn't answer any serious questions. So the ground was primed to accept a John Fetterman. What's the difference? It's only a matter of degree.
Right.
It's a matter of degree. And that's, what that's called? Party leadership. That's what they have in communist countries.
Yeah. And, this whole autopsy, I think we can, and we will continue to discuss for days and weeks and months to come.
Oh, we will.
And we will. So just to wrap this segment, I mean, we could do another 2 hours on this, Ron, but I really appreciate your honest analysis as well, because like I said, I think a lot of people come to the table looking for ways to just simply benefit their preferred outcome and their party role and all of that. So where should people be thinking about all of this right now? What's kind of your one key caution and also encouragement to people as they're going to be digesting this over the next few days and weeks?
I think we need to give. First of all, I don't know how much it matters what you and I, even you and I, even you with your high profile, I don't know how much it really matters. But I think that as members of a political community, what we should be doing is giving space to people like Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis to give each other space and to see what possible beneficial outcome can come of the tension inherent in that, in that relationship right now. I think people need to stop jumping to conclusions and to really look at the deeper trends rather than, we thought we were going to have 54 seats and we might only have 50 or 51. Let's take time to analyze, understand, and make serious, think very seriously about what will work better for us. What are the, as you say, what is the soul that we want to share of the Republican Party, which is the conservative movement in the United States. It lives in the Republican Party.
Well said. And, this has reminded me in the whole Trump DeSantis shift in loyalties of how I've seen people, they love Trump one day and then they love DeSantis. And then there's, this back and forth. It reminds me of the Dr. Seuss book, The Sneetches, where, they run in and it's cool to have a star on your belly. And then all of a sudden it's not cool to have a star on your belly. So they run through and all they're doing is spending all their money. So what people are genuinely doing is spending all their capital, right, on either the star on or star off machine. And people just need to calm down. And I say that lovingly, but or to just take a breather. And as you said, you don't have to be in one camp or the other. We can genuinely be fans of both and of the conservative movement as a whole and say, where can we genuinely get some wins without having to sign up for one flag and one yard sign right now when nobody has even announced and it's so premature. And I think that is the best advice that you could have possibly given. And so I will agree with you and say, let's all just take a collective, kind of sigh of relief that yesterday is done and, tomorrow is a new day and work our way forward from there as a coalition of genuine conservatives. So thanks, Ron, so much for your time. Where can people find you and listen to your podcast?
Well, if you go to at Ron Coleman on Twitter, that's where I mostly spend too much time, and you'll always know what's going on with the Coleman Nation. Spelled like it sounds, Coleman Nation, but not like the word culmination, but it's still a play on words of culmination. If you go to roncoleman.com, you can't go wrong either, because it'll just take you to my law firm bio with the Dillon Law Group. Frankly, finding me is not a problem. Avoiding me is usually the problem.
Well, I have been very, very fortunate to not have been able to avoid you on social media or in person. Always love it when you can stop by. And so look forward to talking with you again soon. Thank you, my friend.
Okay. Have a good one. So long.
It's time to make your health great again as we get closer to the new year. For anyone looking to ignite your fat-burning metabolism, boost your energy, and transform how you look and feel, you must start taking care of your liver now. Your liver is your body's master detoxifier. It performs over 500 key functions in your body every day. It's responsible for cleansing and removing thousands of harmful toxins, man-made chemicals, alcohol, and dangerous food additives and preservatives. After decades of wear and tear, our livers slow down and become sluggish. And this is why so many of us struggle with weight gain and feeling tired all of the time. So fortunately, there is a simple, all-natural solution that I absolutely recommend. It's called Liver Health Formula. Liver Health Formula contains 12 powerful botanicals clinically proven to recharge and protect your liver at the cellular level. It also helps restore your liver's detoxifying abilities, boost your energy levels, and you can kick your natural metabolism into high gear. So Liver Health Formula is backed by science and approved by American doctors. Every bottle is also manufactured right here in America too. So as of right now, as a listener to the Jenna Ellis Show, you can try Liver Health Formula completely risk-free and receive 5 free gifts when you order today. First, you'll receive a free 30-day supply of nano-powered omega-3. This is a powerful blend of omega-3 fatty acids that supports a healthy heart and brain, with 4 times better absorption thanks to this special nano delivery system. You'll also get 4 free ebooks to support every aspect of your health and longevity, regardless of your age. So go to getliverhelp.com/Jenna or call toll-free at 800-282-1757 to claim your risk-free supply of Liver Health Formula and all 5 bonus gifts. That's getliverhelp.com/Jenna or call 1-800-282-1757. You're covered by their 365-day money-back guarantee, so you have nothing at all to risk. But supplies are limited, so head over to getliverhelp.com/Jenna or call toll-free 800-282-1757 now to order Liver Health Formula and get your 5 free bonus gifts. That's getliverhelp.com/Jenna or call 1-800-282-1757. MyPillow is having their biggest sheet sale of the year. You all have helped build MyPillow into the amazing company that it is today. Now, Mike Lindell, the inventor and CEO, wants to give back exclusively to you, his listeners. The Percale bed sheet set is available in a variety of colors and sizes, and they are all on sale. So, for example, the queen size is regularly priced at $89.98, but is now only $39.98 with our listener promo code Jenna, Jenna. So order now, because when they're gone, they're gone. The Percale bed sheets are breathable and have a cool and crisp feel. These come with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee, so don't miss out on this incredible offer. There's a limited supply, so be sure to order now. You can call 1-800-564-8475 and use the promo code Jenna, or go to mypillow.com/Jenna. You can click on the radio listeners square and use the promo code Jenna. That's Jenna. Thank you so much to all of Mike Lindell's listeners and listeners of this podcast for making sure to support MyPillow and using our exclusive listener promo code Jenna. That's Jenna.